The sports you love, the teams you can't live without.
Get a sense of urgency!
This is Jake Scott and Ben Anderson on 97.5 The KSL Sports Zone.
Jake and Ben, 97.5 The KSL Sports Zone. Hey, join Hans and Scotty from noon to 3 at Tim Daly Nissan coming up this Wednesday. 11155 South, Jordan Gateway in South Jordan. 11155 South. Jordan Gateway in South Jordan, Tim Daly, home of the Forever Warranty. The Mammoth are in a bit of a free fall. They've not been able to right the ship, despite the fact that it seems to sink to new lows with every outing. Let's welcome in our Utah Mammoth Insider, Cole Bagley. Read him at KSLSports.com. What's going on, Cole?
Oh, not much, Ben. How are you?
I'm doing well. This is one of the stranger collapses I've seen. And I haven't followed hockey my whole life, so maybe this is more common than not, but they win 7 in a row early in the year. They're sitting at 8-2-0. They have beat some of the best teams in the league on the road. The young players were dominant. And then they lose to Edmonton. And since then, it's 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. They're 3?
They're 4-13 over the last 17 games.
I mean, it's. I hate to sound aggressive, but this is a disaster.
Yeah, it's brutal. Now, I do think the NHL is somewhat unique in that a lot of teams, will experience, fairly significant ups and downs through the course of the season. Every game matters. Every game counts. Guys are generally playing their hardest through all 3 periods of hockey through the majority of a season. And so you're going to get ups and downs. You're going to get cold streaks. You're going to get hot streaks. But this is pretty severe, I would say. I've watched the NHL for almost my whole life, and I've seen, my fair share of similar situations. But this one's pretty significant, to begin the season the way that you had described, and to win 7 in a row, and then to only win 4 games over the last 13, to be outscored, I believe, 59-43 over that period of time, and to be bottom 6 in a collection of different statistical areas, such as save percentage. They have the worst power play in the entire league. It's not a good situation right now, and I think that's kind of to put it lightly.
So I'm curious in this type of spot. I cover the Jazz, and their down years the last 3 seasons have been by design. Last year was the worst season in franchise history. That was on purpose. They were trying to get a draft pick. They knew this is what they were doing. All the players knew what they were doing. All the fans knew what they were doing. It was somewhat it was a plane crash, but the crash was in control. It was a designed plane crash. This is not the design. The players came into this season talking about the Utah Mammoth making the playoffs, and if they continue to play like this, they're going to be lottery bound. They're going to miss the playoffs. So how do you fix something like this traditionally? What type of changes can you make to halt this type of losing streak?
Yeah, it's a good question. These are stretches where team meetings need to happen, and I think the front office really needs to look at the mirror and see what kind of things they can do. This is like you were talking about. This was not the design. From the end of season remarks from the players last year until now, it's been all about not necessarily promising the playoffs, but saying that this season is playoffs or bust. That phrase has been used countless times from players to the front office to coaches, everybody. That's the expectation, is that in year 5 of the rebuild, and based on, how well and how much growth some of the young players showed last season, some of the guys coming into their prime, such as, Keller and Sergachev, and then the additions they made in the offseason, on paper, I think it was obvious this team should be playoff bound, but they're not living up to expectations. And so I do think the front office is reaching a point where you got to look and see what else is available out there. There are quite a few teams right now who are on the cusp of having some fire sales, teams like Nashville and Calgary and, St. Louis. And I think it would be wise for the team to look at that situation and go, is there anybody that we can, potentially get at a lower price that could help benefit our team? I do think there's some talented veteran forwards in that mix, and I also think the goaltending situation needs to be addressed. As I mentioned previously, they have the 6th worst save percentage in the National Hockey League. Both of their goaltenders are putting up subpar backup numbers, and so there's some key areas that need to be adjusted, and I don't think that there's necessarily any solutions internally. I think that at this point, they really got to start looking, outside of the organization to see if they can make any, adjustments that will be, proper solutions.
Vejmelka was so fabulous last year. He gets pulled in the first period yesterday after giving up 3 pretty quick goals. Does the financial commitment they made to him over the offseason make it difficult, or is that not a long-term problem? Can they afford to move on from him or bring somebody else in if they felt like they needed to?
That's a good question. I do think it makes things tougher than it needs to be, but I don't think it puts anything really out of possibility. They still have a decent number of dollars in terms of their cap space. I think they were wise to only sign Vitek Vanacek to just a 1-year contract, kind of a prove-it deal for Vanacek. And unfortunately for him in the Mammoth, he's really not lived up to that. And so, this team has the assets. I think they have the cap space to go ahead and bring, if they felt it necessary and they found a situation where they could potentially trade for somebody or find somebody else, they would be in a position to do so. But, it does make it tough, right? Like, they went all in on Vejmelka. And he had a great year. I think his save percentage last season was like .907. I want to say he was top 15 in the league. Maybe closer to about 20, but in a league where there's 32 teams and there's 2 goaltenders and even 3 in some situations, to be in the top third is very, very good. But it's just been a tough year. The defense has played good in certain areas. It's kind of ironic. I think they've allowed the fewest shots on goal this season, but obviously that's not aligning with how many goals they have allowed in terms of save percentage. So it's not necessarily a situation where they couldn't get somebody, but it does make things a little more difficult than they need to be.
Have the young players progressed the way you think they expected? Are they carrying a big enough load this early?
Logan
Cooley gets his big contract. Gunther got signed last year. Is the expectation that they need to be living up to those deals now, or those investments in the future?
I think they need to be living more so up to the deals now. Logan Cooley, beginning next season, will be the highest paid player on the Mammoth roster. He just signed a $10 million AAV contract. That's a big boy contract. That's a contract where I think you can look at a player and go, we just paid you a lot of money, some of the most money that we've given out in recent years, especially to a guy who's just coming into his, second NHL contract. I think they have played, kind of below expectations. I know that, Cooley had his phenomenal night last week where he had 4 goals and, he had a hat trick earlier in the year. And, he's doing decent points wise, but it's just a lack of consistency that I think has been the biggest issue, for him and for Dylan Gunther. And honestly, you could probably look at the whole team, and make that claim. So they haven't been bad per se, but, based on what we saw in the projections that they were expected to hit this year, I would say that they're certainly underperforming. And it just comes down to, you cannot have these incredibly hot nights where you're putting up 4 goals or 3 goals or 5 points and then go cold for 2-3 games with a point or 2. That's the struggle. That is the biggest, thing that I've been told from players across the league, is that consistency for young players is the greatest challenge. And rightfully so. It's the best league in the world for a reason. And, when you do look at it, Gunther is only 22 and Cooley's only 21, but, they just signed big contracts. And so, expectations go through the roof. And right now they're just not playing up to those expectations.
Andre Tyranny's been the coach for 5 seasons now. Obviously, they've only been in Utah for 2 years, so it maybe feels like he's newer on the job to us locally than it has for fans who have been following this team now for 5 seasons. He's obviously never finished above 500 with the team. In fact, their 12-12-3 start is the best record he has had, other than what they did last year in his first season. Do you think there's an expiration date on him as far as the status quo goes, if they feel like, hey, they're not living up to expectations?
I think any team in the NHL would have to look at it that way, and that's just the nature of the game, right? To be in year 5 of a rebuild, to have promised, not promised, but to have talked so heavily about making the playoffs, about certain players making the jump, to have so much confidence. And again, like I said earlier, to experience extreme highs and lows. Any NHL KSL front office is going to begin questioning that and considering that. And, that's just the way that it is. And obviously, in your tenure, I'm sure that you've seen those similar situations. It's a hard business. But that's just the nature of the game. And so, I wouldn't be shocked if those types of conversations and thoughts are beginning to happen because, year 5 last season was all about playing meaningful hockey. And I think that those were appropriate expectations. This was Logan Cooley was in his second season. Dylan Gunther was in his first full season in the National Hockey League. And, with the relocation and the adjustments and all those types of things, that was fine. But this year 5, you've hit on draft picks, you've acquired talent, you've made the big trades, you've signed a bunch of big contracts. You have to perform. And when you don't perform, questions start being asked.
Does the schedule get any easier? Is this going to flatten out? Are any favors going to be done for the Mammoth, or are they going to have to dig themselves out of this hole?
They have to get to January, at least at 500 or better, or things are going to go south really quickly. And the schedule does lighten up. They're at home a lot more. They're not facing as tough as opponents. The back-to-backs kind of start to slow down as much. Yes, the schedule does you some favors, but at the end of the day, it's still, the National Hockey League, and everybody's going through this. I think that's the biggest thing is with the condensed schedule, everybody is playing pretty much the same number of games in a short amount of time. Everybody's got, back-to-backs every other week, and they're traveling, they're going all over the place. So sure, it gets a little bit easier in terms of you're going to play more home games. But, they haven't really proven that home ice is necessarily, a stronghold for them, a fortress. And so, they're going to have to find a way, and it's tough.
Last thing quickly, we've talked a lot about the condensed schedule. We've heard a lot about it. They talk about it on the broadcast a lot. What does it actually mean for the team? How long is this Olympic break? How does it help them or hurt them?
Yeah, so, with 3 weeks off, they've had to fit a bunch more games ahead of those Olympics to make sure that they get 82 games in between October and April. To be honest, right now I think they're one of the victims of the schedule. It's not helping them. When you lose in the way that they have over these last couple games, when you lose 13 of 14, but you've got to turn around and play a game the next night, or you only have a day off in between. That's tough. They have not had 2 days off in about 3 weeks, and that doesn't change until January. In terms of the break, it could be a positive thing. Historically, there's been plenty of teams who have taken, whether it's the All-Star break or the Olympic break, they've taken it seriously. They've gotten their rest. They've made adjustments they've made trades. They've made acquisitions. That can be a turning point. But it can't be a turning point if you're, just taking on a significant amount of water. So right now is the time that this team needs to figure things out. They need to start getting back in the win column. They need to, put a Band-Aid over things. They need to stop the bleeding. Because if we get later into this month and, they're 6-7 points back from a playoff spot, it pains me to say it, but you kind of just have to wave a white flag. And that's just the way that things are headed unless something drastic changes.
You can listen to him more on the Utah Hockey Podcast. Read him at KSLSports.com and find him on social media. For the best Mammoth coverage, Bagley, KSL Sports. Cole, keep trudging along. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Ben.
There he is, Cole Bagley, giving us the latest on a Mammoth team that is not playing up to expectations right now. We'll see if they're able to right that ship anytime soon.